Love Your Kitchen, Designing the Heart of the Home, proudly sponsored by Blum, the podcast where we explore the art of crafting your dream kitchen. I'm your host, Faye Newman, a freelance kitchen designer with a passion for creating spaces that truly reflect the heart of the home. So for this episode, I Love Your Kitchen, you've got me for the whole episode. So I'll be talking about the kitchen process from start to finish. So hopefully this will become sort of like a step-by-step guide covering where to start, the design process, the preparation stage, and also installation. I'll try and cover the fundamentals of both if you're wanting to do a refurbishment project, an extension and a self-build, just to try and help everybody out there. So first off, what you'll need to start with is your research and planning. So this is really imperative to the whole process. So determine your renovation goals. I've mentioned in a previous episode on where to start, and this was the episode which was looking into the psychology and function of kitchen design and the questions to ask yourself to get a firm understanding on why you're looking to change your existing space. Once you have those questions in place, you can start to mould the process to best work for you. So for instance, these questions may be, your children have moved out. Do we need all these cupboards? Do we need all this storage space? Do we need that large pantry? It might be the opposite, where your family's expanding or you're a young family. You need convenience. You need Tupperware everywhere. You need easy access to everything. You live in really busy lives. Or it might be a case of your child has come back from university, for instance, and you were a household of two. It's now become a household of three. So again, three adults living in the same house will have different needs. So it's always good to get a firm objective as to why you're wanting to change your existing space. And then your designer can work with you to help you mould the best process for you. Next would be to set a budget. So I know it's difficult at this stage to know the cost of kitchens, for instance, if you're looking to do an extension, that sort of thing. But I think maybe look at it as, how much am I willing to spend on this renovation? So for instance, just to give you an idea, 20k for a kitchen, like so for the supply and fit of a kitchen. Back in the day when I first started 8 years ago, used to get you a really decent sized kitchen. Now it doesn't go as far as you may think. So it's just figuring out how much have you got in the pot to spend. There are finance options as well with certain different suppliers, but again, that'll be completely dependent on your personal circumstance and what avenue you're looking to go down. But once you've got this information, it will just give you more of an idea on what the overall spend of the project could look like. And it might be a case of, if you're doing your forever home, for instance, naturally from a price point of view, if it's a couple of grand more to have that dream kitchen that you've always wanted, you're going to want to do that. If it's a case of that you're going to move out of your property in say 5 years time, for instance, this is where logic comes in and you're like, oh, actually, maybe I don't need to splash out and spend for the most premium styles, for instance. I'd still go for quality personally, just to make sure that it can withstand even the 5 years that you're working within that kitchen. But you might not need to spend that extra, as I said, like 5 grand or whatever on a particular style that you absolutely love. And then when you move on to your forever home, that's where you can invest more in those types of furniture pieces. So it's just looking at it, getting a firm understanding of what you're wanting to achieve. And it might be a case of, so when I was speaking to Amanda Hughes from Blum last week, she had made a great example of drawers cost more than base cabinets, but drawers are easily more accessible and they're better to work with. It might be a case of you adapt your kitchen as the years go on. So for instance, you can retrofit drawers within your cabinets. So it might be a case of, even if you go for base cabinets for now, if that's sort of where you are price point wise, but then over the years you can adapt your kitchen to make it more accessible. So say, for instance, we all say, 5 years time we're going to move. What if that looked more like 8, 9 years? There's no point you designing a kitchen for somebody else, essentially, because that's essentially what you're doing, isn't it? You're doing it so in 5 years time the house will resell and then you can move on and do the next one. But equally within those 5 years, or if it does sort of go to 8 years or whatnot, you want to make sure that you are spending a lot of money still. You want to make sure that you are enjoying that space for however long you're in that house for. Also, it would be to get a builder involved. So if it's a case of you're looking to see if you want to knock a wall through, for instance, like, is that a stud wall? Is it a structural wall? So it might be a case of you need structural support, which again, from a price point of view, will add a lot more onto your original plan just to sort of knock through. So even though it's not the fun part, it's getting an idea of everything and getting all your price points in will really just help navigate the whole process. So next, which is the fun part, I would advise you to start doing a little bit of your own research as well. So prior to speaking with a designer, this would be to see what types of kitchens you are initially drawn to. So subconsciously, you'll probably be asking you questions like, do I want everything to be kept seamless, so handless, for instance, because you don't like any of the grooves and you want it to be easy to clean. It might be a case of, you've seen two-tone kitchens and you're like, oh, actually, no, that's not for me. I'd prefer everything just to be in one colour, whether you like layering neutrals, for instance, or whether you like that sort of bold statement colour. You'll start to get an idea of what sort of parts you like. It might be a case of you've got lots of wall cabinets at the moment in your existing kitchen, and it might be a case of you being like, oh, actually, why don't we look at incorporating, or you'd see on sort of Instagram or whatever, these breakfast dresses. You're like, oh my God, I'd absolutely love to have one of those in my space. So it's just gathering all those ideas so that when you do approach your designer, they can help you obviously piece all that together. So the best ways of finding inspiration like this would be your home improvement magazines. So this would be House Beautiful or Better Homes and Gardens. These have lots of useful blogs on their website too. So there's one, for instance, that gives guidance on our favourite home and renovation Instagram accounts to follow. So again, if you're sort of like, oh, I don't know where to start on Instagram, it's not something that you normally do, looking at that blog and then following those accounts will just give you a little bit more inspiration. Reels are obviously really good to look at as well, which are like videos of like opening different storage cabinetry, that sort of thing. Just gets you more involved and to see what aspects of the kitchens that you're enjoying from those accounts. Granted, it might not be a case of we can do all those things within your space. However, if your designer gets a full understanding of what you do want. So, I was working on a project actually with a lady from Birmingham and she was amazing. And she really wanted a breakfast dresser and she was like, I just don't know where I'll be able to put it, whatever. But we actually moved her. We created sort of a zone for her oven and her fridges, etc. So like a larder wall, for instance, and then that allowed us towards the other side of the kitchen to incorporate bifold doors, which are great for breakfast stations. So bifold doors and a dresser, and then with drawers underneath. So she's got her dedicated breakfast station. And actually, it's fairly, other than bespoke size doors, everything was still in a stock door colour. So actually, it was fairly inexpensive to do, as opposed to like you don't necessarily have to go for, the dovetail drawers. You can still achieve a breakfast dresser by just going for, a few bespoke doors and a different configuration. The point of this, that particular client, actually managed to get that dream breakfast station, which she is loving. So that is very good to hear. So once you've sort of gathered your plans as to why you're renovating, obviously firmed up on how much you're willing to spend, and also looked into the research a little bit, we now would then go into your design phase. So this is when you're actually speaking with designers, looking for suppliers, that sort of thing. So one of my top tips for this stage would be to be open about your budget. Speaking about your finances is always a taboo subject. You work hard for your money. You don't want to waste it. You don't want to be ripped off. You don't want to be sold to. From a professional perspective, I completely understand why you might want to withhold that information or not give away too much. But it is at this stage, if you get the right designer and you trust them and you want them to work with you on your project, so you be completely open and honest about your budget, then the designer can work with you to find the right layout, materials, talk about sort of the project size. So if you've got a price point that, you want this lovely big kitchen and you've got an unrealistic price point for that, it would then be this stage where the designer's like, well, actually, I don't think we can actually achieve what you're looking for with that price point. So it'd be a case of, maybe we need to look at less cabinetry, or we need to relook at how much you're willing to spend, or seek other advice like finance, that sort of thing. Different suppliers do different things. So Personally, for me, I know from experience, it's always better for both parties to understand how much is in the pot, and then we can work back from there. I always advise clients to put their wish list together, go all out, and then so you know your worst case scenario for a quotation, for instance, and then you can work it back from there. That would be my advice. So going back to design them. So if you are doing sort of a refurbishment within your existing space, what a designer would need from you is dimensions, obviously, of the shell, so of the room. You can either send them over, or it would be to get a designer to come out to site and survey your space. So we'll need the room dimensions, ceiling height, window and door widths, how high your windows sit off the floor, if you've got any sort of radiators in the space that you're looking to keep or potentially move. Stopcock, if you know the position of that, great. If you don't, then we can work with that. You know, we can help advise on that too. And also, if you've got any pillars, anything that can't be moved, we would need to know that, just so obviously we can build cabinets around those sections if wanted in that particular part of the room. Also boiler, things like that. Obviously all the boring things that we need to know just to make sure we've got a full representation of what that space looks like. Also at this stage, it's useful to know if you want to incorporate any of your existing furniture. So this could be if you've got a dining room table, for instance, that you're wanting to incorporate the dimensions of that. So then on the design, your designer can be like, okay, so from a space planning point of view, it's looking like this, sort of working around. So if it's a case of on the design, you want it to look a certain way so you can see it including your existing furniture, or if you've got beams, you know, things like that. This is a stage where as much information as you give, like you should get out of your design as well from your designer. Also as well with refurbishments, I think it's difficult sometimes to see how the space can be reconfigured when you've been living, you know, in the same space for like 5, 10, 15 years. So having a designer work on your space, allow them to sort of, you know, offer their advice on maybe different layout choices. It might be something that you're like, oh God, I haven't thought about that, and you might not like that. So it's just, you know, I'd personally, I would get all of their ideas out there, give them a wish list. So for instance, if you have a range cooker or built under cooker, like a double oven or something like that, and you now want it to be in a tower cabinet, for instance, this is where your designer will come in and be able to help advise and be like, oh, actually, I think those, you know, those larger cabinets will be beautiful there, and this is why it would work best for this, and this. This is your preparation space and that sort of thing. So it will just give you a different perspective on your existing space. So I actually was working with a client recently where they had a normal double window, and we actually changed it to a letterbox window, which is where you've got it's a long, thin rectangle, but it's raised up off the worktop. So I think we raised it up by 500 mil, something like that. And we purely did that because, one, it mimicked the seamless quality of the kitchen. We changed it to match the bifolds as well in regards to the graphite framework, and also from a functionality point of view, because that's where their sink was, in front of the window, and there wasn't like a lovely view outside. It was the neighbour's fence, for instance, so there was no practical value of looking out and you seeing this lovely view. It was a case of just incorporating natural light within that end of the room, because all of the natural light was the opposite side. So we raised that window up, and actually from a functionality point of view, it was great, because when they were washing up, they haven't got any of the splashes going on like the blind, the windowsill. So it just gave it, we put a quartz splashback, so the same as the worktop behind it, and it just gave it a new purpose, and it looked completely different. And all we did was change the window, so kept it within the same parameters. Spoke with the builder, and they were like, yep, that's absolutely fine, because we're keeping it within the same parameters. We can block this up and then get a new window frame and a new window put in to get more of the look that you're after. But it's still completely changing the space and looks like you've really thought about everything. And when I was speaking to Johnny Gray on a previous episode, he gave a great example of when he was speaking with a client and they had sort of two windows, two double windows. One was in the kitchen, one wasn't. And he actually advised, why don't we change one of those double windows to French doors just to try and bring as much natural light into that space as possible. And it might be a case of, unless somebody new came onto site, like Johnny or whatever, they wouldn't have thought about doing that, or having a picture window where you can have it sort of like, a floor to ceiling window, or all of these different things that you might be able to have. But this is where a designer can come in and be like, oh, actually, have you thought about this? Could you do this? Like, this is the reasons why I would say to do this. And then that would be then up to you guys to be like, okay, well, this change enough for us to warrant us wanting to pay for that difference, and then obviously go from there. But yeah, with a refurbishment, I think it's always great to have new eyes on the space, be open to those new ideas, and also adapt your usable storage as well. So I recently visited Blum's Experience Centre down in Milton Keynes, which is amazing. And they have 2 kitchens side by side. So they're the same dimensions. One kitchen is from a high street brand, and they just went in and was like, can you design this space for me? The other was what they'd designed, obviously, with their products, because they're wanting to, to show off their really great mechanisms, that sort of thing. So the high street design had base cabinets everywhere, 1 drawer set of 3 drawers, wall cabinets everywhere. There was larder furniture where they had the ovens raised up. So in a tower cabinet, they had a shelved larder. So then when we go over to the other side, which Blum designed, they had a 600mm larder with a space tower inside, which in this case was a set of 4 internal drawers fitted into the larder. And they use this to obviously ease accessibility. They're also glazed too, so this means that obviously they're a little bit more luxurious. There are different options you can use for this if you wanted to go for a space tower option, or you can use Legra box internal drawers as well, which is sort of like a standard drawer box that they do. They had this in a tower cabinet, and they had a couple of other towers, obviously to mimic the kitchen the opposite side. But then this is where it changed. So the base cabinetry were mainly drawers. So when I'm talking drawers, I don't mean sort of like a 600mm drawer and then 500. They were large 1200mm drawers, maybe bigger actually, which in this case would seem like it's a lot more expensive, but actually rather than paying for separate cabinets, it actually probably equates to a similar amount or less. So it's just rejigging and rethinking your layout from that perspective. Also as well, with the drawer boxes themselves, because they can be made to any size, it's literally just making sure that you're working with a supplier that can do bespoke size doors, because then obviously that will work fine with what you're going for. Above the drawers, where the hob was, where the working preparation spaces and the main cooking space, they had a large lift up cabinet. So rather than having lots of wall cabinets, as I'd mentioned before, they just had the one really large lift up cabinet, which stays in place once it's lifted up. So again, you can chop away and then pop everything back and then just pull it back down after you finish using it. So from a functional point of view, again, it just eases that whole process for the user. As we then went round the corner to the other side of the kitchen, they actually voided off the corner cabinet, which meant that there was no shelf going into the corner. There was just 2 drawers either side, and then they voided off that section. This is quite controversial. There's a lot of debates on this, whether corner pullouts and things are needed, but again, it depends on your preference. And with this particular design, it worked well to have all of the drawers on show and making sure that each cabinet is completely accessible for everybody. So from a furniture perspective for the whole of that display, it was actually price point for the Blum display over the high street was actually only £300 more, which just shows that even though they had larger drawer boxes, bespoke doors, space tower included, it just shows that not having lots of individual cabinets, not having to pay a fit charge and all of those cabinets can help save costs, and you can achieve a much better looking kitchen, more usable, more unique as well, more personalised. You can really go to town on what works well for you for your kitchen. Going there it was great to see the difference between the 2 displays there, which I thought was a great example to use for discussing options for the design phase in your process. So if you are extending, I would always advise to speak with an architect, even for the smallest extensions. So when I've interviewed Miles from Focus Architects recently, we were speaking about permitted development rights. So this is where you can apply for certain types of work without needing planning permission. But he gave a great example of a project that he was working on. They had an extension 10 years ago. The build at the time suggested that it was covered by permitted development rights because it was on the rear of the property. However, when Miles went out, he was like, that's not the rear, that's the side of the house. So when you go back to the 1940s, when the house was actually built, the principal elevation at the time was actually the other side of the house. So that means that that extension isn't covered by planning permission. I would personally always get an architect or a professional out to see what you're looking to do needs planning permission. Hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, obviously follow the correct steps to get that so that you know the fundamentals are there and you can start that process without any worry. Also, they can advise on whether an extension is actually needed. So for instance, it might be that you can adapt your internal layout, for instance. It might not be a case of you need to extend out after all and apply for that planning. It might just be, or you can reformat the downstairs in order to still gain what you were hoping to gain from that extension. So planning permission can be anything from 8 weeks upwards. So again, this will sort of determine your time frame as well. So if you're going for a refurbishment project, for instance, it's quite easy to put a time frame to it. So if it's a case of you want a kitchen in the summer, for instance, we can work back from that. And then, it's about finding a fitter, etc., getting those booked in. So you've got a little bit more play with your time frames and you can normally get them booked in sooner. Whereas if you are extending, obviously the time frames differ dependent on how long you're waiting for planning permission, how many times you need to apply, when your builder's free. So normally good builders are booked up seems like 3 years in advance, but it's not that. But if they're worth waiting for, what your designer will do is just work, once they're booked in, work back from that to then determine the steps needed for your kitchen project. Once your designer has finalised the best layout with you, also there's considerations to think about, like the finer details like your handle choices, your taps, and also your worktops. So there's lots of different worktops out there. You've got your solid surfaces, which have a slightly different process, which I can talk through during the installation phase. And you've got laminate worktops, which can be fitted on site. So again, once your layout is firmed up, I would then start honing in on introducing these different materials, seeing what price points they come in at, and then that will obviously determine the overall cost of your kitchen project moving forward into installation. So once everything's been finalised and your fitter has been booked in, work back from this date. So we normally allow 1 to 2 weeks for your rip out to get your first fix of electrics sorted, your plumbing, moving any gas pipes, your plaster work, whitewash of paint as well at this stage is always really good to do, just so then you're not painting or decorating as when you've got your kitchen in. Also your flooring as well, so it depends what sort of flooring you're opting for to determine what process you need. If you're going for stick down flooring, for instance, and then that can be fitted afterwards, you won't need 2-week time frame prior to your fitting in order to fit your flooring. So again, work with your trades, work with your designer just to determine your sort of schedule of works all the way through. Also check to see whether waste removal is included in your quotation, so whether you need to hire a skip or whether the company sorts that out, or if they just dispose of your existing kitchen. Something that I would always recommend also from a sustainability perspective is, no matter how much you hate your existing kitchen, look to see whether you can sell it online. So even if you put it on Gumtree for £1 or on Facebook Marketplace, it might be a case of, even if it's going into student accommodation or it's going into somebody that doesn't want to pay for sort of like a whole new kitchen, for instance, and are happy to use your existing furniture and adapt it to best suit them, I would always recommend doing that, because then you're saving on a skip price. So you're saving on the price of a skip, and it's better for the environment, so it's not going into landfill. So I would always try that avenue. There are some companies out there where you can buy secondhand kitchens through that. However, sometimes they normally take quite a big commission, or it might be a case of you need to hold it into storage until they sell that. So it can get a little bit tricky. But I always think as well, if somebody's buying your existing kitchen, it's normally their responsibility to rip it out. So if they are doing that and they are then using that for somewhere else, maybe in their house or an investment property, they're going to rip it out to a standard that, won't hopefully like ruin your walls. So that's normally what I advise on at this stage. But yeah, so basically everything needs to get ripped out. Everything obviously needs to be removed from all your cupboards. There's quite a funny story actually recently where a project manager that I work really closely with, the day that they were going for rip out, so this is at 8:30 in the morning, the lady was making a shepherd's pie. So, and I don't think that it was actually in the oven at this stage. I think it was a case of they obviously wanted to meal prep, which completely understand once you haven't got your kitchen for a few weeks, it can be very intimidating. So she, bless her, she was meal prepping, but she decided to meal prep at 8:30 in the morning. And I think she was still making the mashed potato for the top of the shepherd's pie. So she hadn't even put it in the oven yet or emptied any of the cupboards. So I think poor Nigel had to go in and help her with that aspect as well. So to ease that process for tradesmen coming into your property, please empty out all of your cupboards. And also just sort out what you need as well. This is a great stage to actually think, do I need all this tableware? Do I need this? Do I need all these mugs, for instance? And just have a fresh, have a spring clean and reorganise everything from there. Obviously, then they can remove your existing kitchen. When everything's been done, so sort of like your first fix of electrics and things in that week or two prior to your kitchen, you normally then have your delivery either a day before or the Friday before to then start on the Monday. This is purely just so you've got your deliveries out the way, and then you can, obviously, you're good to go with your fitter, straight away on installation day. With this, make sure that your furniture is stored in a dry place. I know this sounds ridiculous, but make sure that you've got no windows needing to be replaced. Make sure it's a watertight area, especially if you're working with, sort of solid wood materials. They will warp. So if you've got like tall panels, for instance, they will warp if there's any moisture in that room. So it's really important to know and to make sure that everything is watertight. Then your kitchen fitter will start your fitting process. All of your cabinetry will be fitted. If you're going for solid surfaces, what we will need to do, like once all your base cabinets are in, if you're having sort of a breakfast station with a piece of worktop within that cupboard, for instance, a templater from the worktop company will have to come out, template the space, take that off to their workshop. And normally it takes 7 to 10 working days from start to finish. They will go out, obviously get everything fitted and made bespoke for you, come back and refit everything. So if you are having an undermount sink or a Belfast sink or anything fitted underneath the worktop, these need to be fixed in place prior to templating, and also your tap needs to be on site so that the templater can check the diameter of the tap hole. It does normally say this online as well. However, it is just best practice to make sure it is on site, just so that the worktop company has everything that they need to know prior to obviously manufacturing everything for you. You then sort of fit your hob and then your splashback on top of that. There might be a few second site visits needed for solid worktop. So if you're having a dresser, for instance. So what I mean by a dresser cabinet, it's when a cupboard is coming right down to the work surface. So therefore, we need to consider when that work surface is fitted underneath and how that whole schedule of works will happen. So the fitter wouldn't fit the dresser straight away and then slip the worktop underneath it. You can do it like that. Personally, I've preferred or allocated in the price for the fitter to go back onto site and just fit that properly once the worktop's been fitted. So you can do it either or really, where as long as all of your base cabinets and your sinks and your taps on site, that's the main bits that are needed for your worktop template and fit. Once that's fitted, the fitter can then fix your hob in place, obviously your tap in place, anything that's sort of sat on top of the worktop. Upstands will be fitted by the worktop company as well, and splashbacks. If you're going for a mantle section, for instance, it might be a case of that mantle needs to be fixed or built once that worktop's been in place. But again, this would be for your designer to work with you on this. If that is the case, you might need a second revisit for your splashback, for instance, because then it's a new dimension to take into account once the worktop supplier knows the height needed for where that mantle sits. There can be sort of to and fro in sometimes with solid worktops, but it just depends on what layout and things that you're looking at. But as standard, it's one template, one fit. and then it's normally 7 to 10 working days in between, which seems like a lifetime when you're in the middle of a renovation project. So just, bear with it. They are worth it once they're in. There's no getting away from that. They do have a longer lead time to, say, like your laminates. Laminates can just be fitted with the furniture. So again, slightly shorter lead time from that perspective. Obviously, it takes longer for them to fit, but equally it won't be sort of 7 to 10 working days. Once that's sorted, you can also have your second fix of electrics, have all your ovens and things connected up. And then, you should be good to go with your kitchen. Also, then it will be just obviously to clean up all your drawers, get rid of all the dust. It seems to go everywhere. Your fitter should help with this as well. And they should leave it in a position where it's usable. You might also, we have it as well, where clients ring up and they're like, oh, we've received the wrong door colour. And it's actually because they haven't peeled off the blue vinyl needed to as a protective layer over the kitchen, like the stickers. So just make sure if you've got any sort of stickers or anything on it, just peel that off, and then you might see your porcelain door underneath it. It should be left in a position where you should be able to just, you're good to go after that point. Also, as well, something to note is if you're doing like a utility or something like that, you don't necessarily have to do it all in one go. If it's sort of overwhelming to do just the kitchen process and you want to keep a space where you can wash up, you can do it in 2 different stages if that works better for you. But again, it's just when you find the right team, it's working with your designer, working with the trades, and to just find the best avenue for you, really. So if you're doing an extension project, then obviously there's a longer lead time involved in that. So work with your builder to understand, the different stages of the build. You'll need screed put down. They put that down on the flooring, and that's the base to the extension. That will have to be fully dried in order to be able to lay a floor, for instance. So understand what the lead times are for these things through your tradesman. And it might be a case of a lot of builders, if your kitchen's going into a new part of the house, they allow you to keep your existing kitchen for as long as possible before then ripping that out. Then you're hopefully without a kitchen for less time. So I'm hoping this episode hasn't been too much information for you to take on, or if you are partway through the process, it gives you a few more fundamentals and some more insight on things to think about, especially obviously the reselling your kitchen on if you can. That can really save money. Adapting your design as you go along. It might be a case of you're using your kitchen, you get used to using your kitchen, then you're like, oh, actually I do need that internal drawer pack there or whatever, and then you can start adapting it as you go, really. If you've got any more questions, queries at all, please do get in touch with me. I'm always happy to help. So obviously my name is Faye Newman. So just inquire through my website, which is www.fayenewmandesign.com. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Love Your Kitchen, Designing the Heart of the Home, brought to you by Blum, the podcast where we explore the art of crafting your dream kitchen. If you have any questions you'd like answering on the podcast or want to find out more about how I can help you, then please visit fayenewmandesign.com. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you have liked what we have spoken about, why not like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Also, what you can do is click on the notification bell to keep yourself notified of all the new content to come.